Welcome to the Bader Hour, a citizen assembly meeting produced by Staci Gustafson of the Universal Community Project. Dan Bader connects the dots between corrupt state government, pharmaceuticals, elites, climate change, depopulation, and more. What you need to know to be mentally healthy in a challenging world. Hello and welcome. I'm Staci Gustafson of the Universal Community Project, a 360-degree platform for holistic community problem solving. I'm happy to bring you the wisdom of Dan Bader, a licensed clinical professional counselor and licensed marriage and family therapist. He has been trained to independently diagnose and treat mental health and substance abuse problems and has 23 years of experience working in community settings. He retired from Chicago Department of Public Health in 2016. All right, let's move into Dan's presentation. And if there's time at the end, we can open the floor for some questions. So Dan, what topic will you be presenting tonight?
Thank you, Staci. I'm going to talk about some aspects of depression and PTSD, and try to show some of the underlying dynamics for all of it. So what I want to start with right now, I'm going to put up a slides. Those of you who've seen some of my presentations in the past may have seen this, this is major depressive disorder in DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that was created in the latest version in 2013. So this is how major depressive disorder is diagnosed. And so it says, and I'm just going to do this really quickly, 5 or more of the following symptoms have been present during the same 2-week period and represent a change from previous functioning. At least one of the symptoms is either number 1, depressed mood, or number 2, loss of interest or pleasure. So these are the 9 symptoms, and you have to have either 1 or 2. Number 1, depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by either subjective report, for example, somebody says they feel sad, empty, hopeless, or observation made by others. For example, appears tearful. And in the mental health world, symptoms are those things that a person reports. I'm sad, I'm angry, etc. We may not be able to see the sadness or the anger when they are reporting that that's what they've been suffering. But if you see somebody's face and they're looking obviously angry, or somebody is crying, we call that a sign. So signs and symptoms. Number 2, markedly diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by subjective account. Those are symptoms, or observation. Those are signs. So you have to have number 1 or number 2 in order to get this diagnosis. And then we need some more things to add on to that. Number 3, significant weight loss when not dieting, or weight gain. And they kind of go define that, what they're going to call a weight gain or loss. Insomnia or hypersomnia nearly every day. You can't sleep, or you sleep too much. Psychomotor agitation or retardation nearly every day. You're highly agitated, or your motor, and you seem kind of retarded, your motor skills, etc. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. That's 6. 7, feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt nearly every day. 8, diminished ability to think or concentrate, or indecisiveness nearly every day. And then finally, number 9, recurrent thoughts of death, not just fear of dying, recurrent suicidal ideation without a specific plan, or a suicide attempt, or a specific plan for committing suicide. So you need either number 1, depressed mood, or number 2, or you can have both usually, markedly diminished interest or pleasure in anything, and then you need some of these others, and that'll get you a major depressive disorder assigned to you. So let me now go to some theories, just in real brief condensed form, of what causes depression. So here we have biomedical theories. And this particular, diagram shows, there's the brain, and then, if you're normal, that's how it looks. The spaces with those little triangles, those are called synapses. That's the little area between neurons in the brain, nerve cells, neurons in the brain. And then there's a depression one where you don't have, in this case, they're usually talking about serotonin, that neurotransmitter. When you're normal, you've got some serotonin going from neuron to neuron. When you're depressed, not so much. And after treatment, then you go back, it looks kind of like normal. That's the biomedical way of looking at this. And so we see biomedical theories. Depression results from a deficiency of neurotransmitters such as serotonin. Depression is maintained by the ongoing neurotransmitter deficiency. Don't have enough serotonin. In some cases, they might say you don't have another one. Norepinephrine usually is cited, but serotonin's the one everybody's, they marketed it with. So that's, depression is maintained by the ongoing neurotransmitter deficiency. Depression is remediated by taking antidepressant medication, which corrects the neurotransmitter deficiency, often referred to as a chemical imbalance. Note that nutritional deficiencies and need area deficiencies, which some of you know what I'm talking about by need area, but I'm going to go over it today again. And need area deficiencies are minimized by biomedical theories. They're hardly relevant, actually, at all. Then we move here to skill deficit theories, where people have skill deficits or performance deficits, and somebody's, what do I do with this toilet? How do I fix it? And skill deficit theories, depression arises because the individual lacks skill sets necessary for the achievement of goals and the satisfaction of material and interpersonal needs. Depression is maintained as a consequence of the ongoing skill deficits and maladaptive self-efficacy beliefs. Self-efficacy means you have a sense that you can cope with things, that you are capable of coping. That's what efficacy is, coping ability. So anxiety avoidance problems are viewed as potential symptom maintenance factors. So in skill deficit theories of depression, they note that if you keep avoiding things, like maybe you need to take a class to improve your skills somewhere, and you have too much anxiety to go to a class, well, that's just going to keep everything going. Then the depression is relieved when the emotional, cognitive constraints on the acquisition of skills are removed. The necessary skills are mastered, and sources of adaptive positive reinforcement are readily available. Skill deficit approaches de-emphasize psychiatric diagnoses and highlight need deficiency problems. Okay. Then we come to cognitive behavioral theories, which a lot of people know about these. They were first evolved, I think, in the late 1970s. A psychiatrist named Aaron Beck was maybe the first real big proponent of cognitive theory, cognitive behavioral therapy and theory. And there was another guy who had a slightly different framework, but his name was Albert Ellis, and he had what was called rational emotive therapy. But so let's look here a little bit at some of the cognitive behavioral concepts. Cognitive behavioral theories assert that psychopathology results from maladaptive attributions and appraisals concerning the self, the environment, and the future. Thoughts, emotions, and behaviors interact to produce maladaptive decisions and beliefs concerning the self, the environment, and the future. And, you know, if you ever read any of the, especially the most dominant school of cognitive behavioral therapy, you know, this is, you're familiar with this. Depression is marked by beliefs and rumination centering around personal inadequacy and a hopeless future. Now, this is something people aren't so aware of, and I kind of throw this in here. This is not, but I think it's relevant. So this is the social cognition default mode, neural network. Areas of the brain that are concerned with social reasoning become active when areas of the brain concerned with non-social reasoning are switched off. So we've got social reasoning and non-social reasoning. Social reasoning processes include social comparisons. How do I rate compared to that person over there? Is he better than me? You know, that kind of stuff. Social comparison thoughts. Fairness issues. Is something fair? And trying to assess how you are being perceived by others. That's social reasoning. We spend a lot of our time thinking about social comparisons, fairness in the issues, and trying to assess how others are thinking about us. Frequently, maladaptive decisions and beliefs are constructed while in this mode. Social isolation and its attendant lack of emotional support and community involvement greatly increase the probability of the formulation of maladaptive decisions and beliefs. So if you're, you know, if you're thinking something over and over again, you know, you're likely to have it crystallize into a belief. So if you're constantly making a social comparison with somebody or other people in general, and you know, you start to think, yeah, I'm just not as good as other people. I'm inferior. If you think that enough times, there's really a decent probability that's going to morph from just a hypothesis, you know, could be, maybe that's how it really, you know, to that's how it is. And that's a very fundamental thing. And I'll just quickly go over the beliefs, decisions constitute symptom maintenance factors. So when a decision is made or a belief is formed, consciousness is altered in the following ways. Consciousness is granted easy access to information that supports the decision or belief. Consciousness is denied easy access to information that contravenes, you know, goes against the decision or belief. So if I'm having constant thoughts that I'm inferior for whatever, you know, and then it suddenly morphs into a belief, not just a hypothesis, could be, maybe. Now my mind will provide me with all the knowledge that supports my belief in inferiority. And it will not give me the information very easily that goes against the belief that I am inferior and I'm no good, you know, that kind of thing. So you have to be careful not to let yourself crystallize beliefs, because they're really, you have to really work to unload them once they're there. And so then number 3, if information that contravenes the decision or belief enters consciousness, it is usually rejected via rationalization or minimization. So once you've got the belief, I'm inferior, and then somebody says to me, oh, Dan, you know, you're really pretty damn good at this and that and so on. Uh, I'm going to either minimize that opinion by, yeah, that person's telling me that, but what do they know? I don't respect their opinion about what they're saying, or I'll rationalize it by saying, oh, they're just saying it to make me feel good. They can see I'm down, that kind of thing. So you have to know, once it's a belief, that even if you are now have information, which you need to get, that goes against your belief, if it's not a really sound belief, you have to check yourself, catch yourself when you start to minimize that information or rationalize it away. So number 4, emotionally driven beliefs or decisions are frequently maladaptive and occasionally delusional. Most people who have delusional problems, they're walking around with a lot of beliefs that no longer really have them well rooted in consensual reality. And they have problems as a consequence of that. And it's very hard to ever let them to get rid of them. Because once they're there, they will rationalize and minimize any information that goes against it. And they have plenty of access in their minds to knowledge that justifies, that supports their delusional belief. So number 5, emotionally driven beliefs, decisions contribute to the suicidality, addiction problems, and lack of motivation that characterizes depression. That, beliefs are horrible maintenance factors of conditions. And, you can take medication. Once you have beliefs, it's really a problem if they're not, if they are not rooted in some sort of, realistic world occurrences, etc. Beliefs can be imprinted via group pressure or social influence. Very important, to note that, or most people realize that, but it's got to be laid out. Beliefs can be imprinted via ruminations while the mind brain is in the social cognition default mode. So if you're spending a lot of time by yourself, and you're going to probably spend a good deal of time maybe thinking about social comparisons, how others are perceiving you, fairness, respect kind of issues. You got to be careful, and you have to just know this. This is just psychoeducational knowledge that it's important to know if you want to be able to take care of yourself concerning mental health. And okay, so let's go down. What else? Okay, so emotional substrate of some cognitive distortions. Usually in cognitive therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, they list a lot of, sometimes there's anywhere from 12 to 20 common, kind of distortions. These are a few, but just to, so catastrophizing, it's an automatic instinctual thought driven by anxiety. If we have time, I think I will be again going to the anxiety diagram. And that's just part of when you're in an anxious state, you think that whatever the threat is just, it's a nightmare. It's a catastrophe. It's just normal to catastrophize when you're in an anxious state. And, you can call it a distortion, and it usually is going to be a distortion, but it's instinctual, hardwired kind of a result. Dichotomous or black and white judgments frequently constitute imprinted beliefs or automatic / instinctual thoughts driven by anger or the emotion we call interest excitement. When you're angry at somebody or something, they're all bad. There's nothing good about them. That's a black and white. Usually most people are not all good or all bad. They're a mix. Most of us as human beings are a mix of positive and negative traits. And with interest excitement, it's kind of the flip of anger. whatever it is you're focusing on is all good, all important, all necessary. I mean, and that's usually going to be a distortion. Even if it's good, it's never as good as it feels when you're in those states. Um, Emotional reasoning, another common, cognitive distortion, refers to making decisions, forming beliefs, or taking actions under the influence of strong emotional states. Fundamental emotion management premise is just that when you're in a high emotional state, please don't make decisions or even worse, form beliefs about anything or anybody. Let yourself come down. You're never going to be emotion free, but let yourself come down from the intense state before making the decision. A lot of times it's just an impulsive thing people do that get lots of consequences. So, okay. So let me see here. Okay, so now we're going to go to in terms of depression, and you'll see this. We're going to go to some discussion of PTSD, but let's look at depression and need deficiencies. Now, this slide has Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that's a very, very popular kind of a concept or framework. Maslow was a humanistic psychologist. I think he did a lot of his work back actually in the 40s, 50s, and into the 60s, but it's been carried on. And so Maslow had a hierarchy of needs, which I think is very relevant. And when I do the 3 building blocks of mental health, where I break things down into 4 need areas, they are definitely congruent with what Maslow was talking about. So we have, in this hierarchy of needs, we have physiological needs, safety needs. Let me just use my reading glasses for a second here. Belongingness needs, esteem needs, and then up at the top, we have self-actualization. Now, so you can see that these needs are very, very fundamental. In order to get to self-actualization, where kind of the idea is you actualize who the best that you could really be, or what your tendencies are, you have to have these other needs taken care of, but you're not likely to get up there to the self-actualization. Now, these days, people like to, some people who I used to actually short while work with on some climate change stuff, they like to say, well, on top of self-actualization, we have, kind of the group hive mind, or, this kind of thing, which is even above self-actualization. But in any case, let's look at the issue of depression and need deficiencies. So again, this is something I go over a lot. I'm going to do it right now quickly. In order to understand need deficiencies, your human needs that are deficient, that must be taken care of, it's important to understand this distinction I'm making between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. And by unconscious mind here, and I'm not meaning a Freudian unconscious, id, ego, superego, or other psychodynamic concepts of an unconscious mind, or a Jungian psychology version of unconscious. It's not that. So the conscious mind is rooted in the modern world. The unconscious mind is rooted in a hunting, gathering, foraging world, which in all honesty, that's what we were evolved to be in. That's what our emotional, that's who we are really. Of course, most of us don't live in that environment, that type of environment anymore. But anyway, the conscious mind is rooted in the modern world. It is very aware of modern technology, hospitals, supermarkets, food banks, homeless shelters, and telephone numbers. The conscious mind knows we can call 911 if we are sick. It knows an ambulance will transport us to the hospital, and doctors and nurses will look after us. The conscious mind is the modern world. That's where we are. That Zoom is totally conscious mind kind of stuff. What we're doing right now, high tech stuff. But the unconscious mind is rooted in a hunting, gathering, foraging world, a tribal world consisting of families banded together. It is not aware of the modern world. The unconscious mind constantly monitors our drive states, hunger, thirst, sex, need for affection, etc., etc. And our thoughts, like a thought like, wow, I don't know if I'm going to have food for my children at the end of the month. It monitors our drive states and our thoughts, the unconscious, to determine if our human needs are being met. If the unconscious perceives that our needs are being inadequately attended to, it will transmit emotional pain into our consciousness. And, again, you guys probably, some of you, have heard me, the emotional pain. Well, let's see what I have here. Okay, need deficiencies and chronic emotional pain. Need deficiencies can include financial instability, poor emotional support, lack of community involvement, and neglected individual development. Need deficiencies generate chronic emotional pain, usually a mixture drawn from the negative emotions of anxiety, sadness, shame, and anger. Chronic. We also have everyday emotional pain, which is the same kind of emotions, but these are things that just occur in the course of daily living. But this chronic emotional pain will be there regardless of what's going on for you day to day if your needs are not being taken care of. Chronic, I say emotional pain is instinctive and very similar to physical pain. It's a signal that you better take care of whatever it is that's wrong. Chronic emotional pain differs from everyday emotional pain. I already said that. Chronic emotional pain is associated with our hardwired emotional adaptation to small group tribal living situations. If the sources of emotional pain are not remediated or partially anesthetized, the probability of an emotional breakdown occurring is high. You can't let it go on too long for the average person, because if they don't do something to at least partially anesthetize that pain, they will break down as a person, which, I say here finally, if the sources of chronic emotional pain are not removed, the vulnerability to depression will remain, for sure. So there's three outcomes that result from chronic emotional pain. One, an emotional breakdown. Full-blown breakdowns usually terminate with one or more of the following outcomes: a psychiatric hospitalization, that's the best, and an incarceration, not so good. Injury to self or others, no, not very good usually. Destruction of key relationships or suicide. So most people have an intuitive feeling about where you're going to go with a breakdown. You're going to be out of control. You're going to be spinning out of control emotionally, and you're going to make a lot of rash decisions and act on beliefs that you've crystallized, etc. Now, usually people don't want to go that way, and they're going to try to do everything they can to prevent that from happening. So what we get is, this is the second outcome from chronic emotional pain, which comes from need deficiencies. Evolution of a maladaptive lifestyle, frequently addictive, devoted to partially anesthetizing the chronic emotional pain and thereby preventing a breakdown process. Drink the alcohol, smoke the cigarettes, eat the comfort food, gamble, do whatever. You can put together your own program, your own maladaptive lifestyle to prevent yourself from falling apart. It's better to have that maladaptive lifestyle a lot of the time, really, than to have a full-blown breakdown. Because with a full-blown breakdown, yeah, you might end up in a psychiatric hospital quickly and get yourself stabilized, and then you get another chance. But it's not so good when you break the law as you break down, or you destroy relationships and people, or commit suicide. So the third outcome, this is the one you need to do. It's the remediation of the need deficiencies that generate the chronic emotional pain. That's what you want to do. Just work on getting your need deficiencies corrected. And then you won't have chronic emotional pain. You'll still have day-to-day emotional pain. And you do have to know how to manage those negative emotions day to day. But at least you won't have this chronic kind of a situation where no matter what you do or what happens day to day, you're still going to be suffering. And it usually will get diagnosed if you go to a mental health professional as some sort of a disorder. Okay, let me see what we have here. Okay, and then briefly, within the 3 building blocks framework, I've got I have 4 need areas. One is financial, material, stability, and you can see if I would go back to the Maslow hierarchy of needs, this is one of the basic ones. Financial, material stability is in place if you and your family can reliably obtain the necessities of life. If the unconscious perceives that the preservation of material stability is at stake, it will generate chronic emotional pain. Frequently, it'll be a combination of anxiety and frustration, anger. It could also be other negative emotions, a lot of negative emotionality. But of course, it's almost common sense. If you're worried about your survival, you're going to have anxiety, and you're also going to have frustration, anger type feelings because you can't get what it is you need on a material level. If a chronic condition of financial instability is not remediated, a full-blown depressive breakdown can occur. Or you'll have a full-blown addiction or very unhealthy lifestyle. And then in the end, you can also get depressed. But the idea is, again, a lot of these very unhealthy lifestyles are all about trying to control chronic emotional pain and not have a big breakdown. Okay, let's see here. Then we go to emotional support. And there's, the unconscious mind is always looking at our material stability, now our emotional support. An adequate emotional support system is in place if you are attached or bonded to 4 to 6 individuals with whom there is a mutual obligation to help one another if either you or the other person is sick, injured, or in great distress. You've got my back, I've got yours, and that's key. And the unconscious mind does not care who is in your emotional support system. Any combination of significant other, family members, friends, and associates is acceptable. But it must be somebody who will come to your aid as best they can if you are needing it. And you also have in your mind a commitment to do the same for the other person as best you can. Now, if the unconscious perceives your emotional support is weak or absent, it will generate chronic emotional pain, usually a combination of anxiety and loneliness/sadness. Lack of emotional support is a definite risk factor for suicide. Now, I'm not going to, just because of the time, and I want to get to this a little bit about PTSD, but, again, this is an important area. And remember, the unconscious mind is rooted in tribal hunting, gathering, foraging world. It is not in the modern world, and it's really a key thing to realize. Community involvement is the third need area. Community involvement is in place if you are a contributing member of a group cooperating together in order to achieve a goal or carry out a mission. Now, if you're born into a tribal situation, hunting, gathering, foraging type tribal situation, well, that's your community. You don't have to go looking for one. That's it. You're born into it and you'll die in it. The unconscious mind doesn't care what kind of community involvement you have. It just cares you have one in place. It is as satisfied with street gang or organized crime activity as it is with civic minded pursuits. The unconscious mind, this tribal kind of mind, is in the modern world, we have lots of different, say, groups that you could join and take care of your community, and literally thousands of them, of all kinds. And it's important, but the unconscious mind, if you're in a street gang, fine. Not a problem. That's your community involvement. You cooperate with your other brothers and sisters in the pursuit of criminal activities, and you divide up the spoils. What you get. If the unconscious mind perceives that community involvement is absent, it will generate chronic emotional pain, usually a combination of anxiety and shame. Lack of community involvement is a risk factor for suicide. Now, you're not likely to get to that suicide. It's a risk factor if you are doing, drugs or other things, to partially, or taking psychiatric drugs to partially anesthetize this chronic emotional pain. So then with final individual development, which really in a way can morph into, kind of self-actualization space, really. But individual development is in place if you are acquiring new skills or improving skill sets you've already assimilated. This need area is concerned with the acquisition of knowledge and skills for dealing with the environment. The unconscious mind does not care what you are learning or improving. If the unconscious mind perceives that individual development is lacking, it will generate chronic emotional pain, usually a combination of sadness and shame. So those are the need areas. Now let me see. Okay. Now we're going to jump ahead here if I've got this label. I think I do. Okay. Now I'm going to kind of segue into depression and PTSD, which is, of course, became a, the whole concept of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It started mostly during World War II for our military personnel who were getting traumatized in the battlefield situations. And so then it became, again, it started to really come into its own under the name PTSD, I think, spinning off of the Vietnam War, which ended in the 70s. And again, though that was focusing on people who had been traumatized in usually battlefield arenas and had either suffered serious trauma themselves, or, and this usually would create the worst kind of PTSD, they had brutalized people, tortured them, murdered them, women, children, whoever. And then, of course, once they were out of the heat of the war situation, they deeply regretted what they had done. very hard to get over that once you get to a different kind of environment. Not everybody, but that's so exposure to trauma. Traumatic stressors can be sudden. You get hit by a car or something, or prolonged. Rape, shootings, accidents, and natural disasters are examples of sudden stressors. Combat war experiences, domestic violence, incarceration, childhood sexual and/or physical abuse, and we could add emotional to that, are examples of prolonged stressors. So here are the common PTSD symptoms. Reliving or re-experiencing symptoms consist of intensive memories, nightmares, and so-called flashbacks. Anxiety symptoms result in compulsive attempts to avoid people, places, and things that trigger memories of the trauma. Because having nightmares and having, experiences where you're being flooded with these memories, it's very, you don't want that. And so avoidance, but the problem is the avoidance produces need deficiencies and consequent chronic emotional pain. So these people who are PTSD, and that doesn't mean they can be depressed too, of course, but because of their high anxiety and their need to avoid, having things triggered, that makes it hard to get your needs taken care of. How do you take care of your financial stability, maybe, or your emotional support people, etc. Now, arousal symptoms reflect a lower threshold for intense emotionality, particularly anxiety and anger. The lower arousal threshold, coupled with maladaptive emotion management, leads to need deficiencies and chronic emotional pain. Now, this is again almost commonsensical. I mean, if you're in a PTSD producing environment, it's not in your interest to have, a real high threshold for getting angry or anxious. That means you're not going to be able to survive your dangerous environment very well. You need metaphorically to sleep with one eye open and be real, a little bit paranoid. That's good for survival if you're in that kind of dangerous environment. But, once you're out of that environment, if you get out of it, your mind is still going to be, your whole being is going to be reacting that way. And that's not very adaptive. It's not good in a workplace, not good in a relationship, et cetera, just not good at all. And again, that can result in need deficiencies. Because how do you take care of your needs if you can't control your arousal and your emotions? And it's true for people, people who are incarcerated, everybody, if you've never, experienced or had any real experience with jails or prison, the thing is, you've seen it on the, movies and the TV and everything, that in that kind of a dangerous predatory environment, which, by the way, I would have to say is created on purpose. But anyway, that's how you need to be, be careful and be ready to defend yourself at all times, because that's adaptive in that environment. But being like that for years, and then you come out into the non-prison world, well, you're still going to be that way. And let's see you get along really well with, family and friends. It's not easy. So, yeah, an inability to regulate anxiety or anger can lead to chronic hypervigilance, insomnia, irritability, and concentration problems. Some of those are, from that list of depression problems also. Okay, now I'm going to go right here to something I did once or twice recently, but what I call the vervet monkey experiment. And I'm putting it here because after what I've just been going over, I think it makes some sense. So numerous experiments with vervet monkeys have shown an association between serotonin level and position in a dominance hierarchy. So the better your position in a dominance hierarchy, generally speaking, we're going to assume for this, your serotonin level will be better than if you're in a lower level in the hierarchy. So imagine this is a thought, but this is all based on research that was carried out in the 1990s, these vervet monkey experiments. Imagine 5 enclosures, each of which contains 5 male vervet monkeys who have no previous experience with one another. Each group is in an enclosure, will sort themselves into a dominance hierarchy. May take a couple days or, but it's going to happen. The monkeys, 5 monkeys, there will be a number 1, a number 2, everyone will know their place. Just like sometimes out in the, schoolyard or something, the boys will kind of, after a while, they'll figure out who's number 1 and so on, where you fit in. And with the girls, it's a little bit different. It's not so much based on, let's say, physical strength or fighting ability or this kind of thing. Okay, so each group will sort themselves into a dominance hierarchy. The higher the ranking in a hierarchy, the higher the level of serotonin. In these experiments, which this is based on, they were measuring a serotonin metabolite, taken from the urine of these monkeys. So the highest ranking monkey in each group, so we've got these 5 groups, they've sorted themselves out. Now we're going to take the 5 alpha monkeys. Now we're going to throw them together. So the highest ranking monkey in each group will now be put into a separate enclosure where a new dominance hierarchy will be created. They've all been alphas in their previous groups, but now, there's only going to be 1 alpha out of this group of alphas, and the others are going to have to sort themselves out. Now we also take the lowest ranking monkey, the omega monkey in each group, and we place them into a new enclosure. Well, they're going to sort out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's going to be one of those omegas is now going to be the alpha, and so on. Now, the omega monkey in each of these situations suffers serious PTSD and or depression, if you wanted to, put it in human terms. Because what happens is in these situations, and it's very similar to what happens in human situations, the number 1 monkey in each enclosure establishes their dominance through aggressiveness, being able to make they don't have to attack necessarily. Once the hierarchy is in place, there's no need for any fighting or fooling around in that way particularly. But the number 1 monkey just has to make sort of an assertive, aggressive move, kind of like making a threat if it had language. And it has ways of, through vocalizations of doing that too. And then the other monkeys will essentially move away. If the number 1 monkey, let's say, moves directly against, let's say, the number 2 monkey, who the number 1 feels, the alpha feels is kind of starting to encroach too much, getting too bold, it will then maybe, do something actual physically to the number 2. The number 2 will then pass it on to the next 3, 4, or 5, whoever is nearest. And then that one will pass it on. At the end of the day, every time that chain happens, it's the number 5 monkey that always receives it in the end. They're always going to get messed over. So, you can see that number 5 monkey trapped in this enclosure, kind of like a human prison situation in certain circumstances, is going to be very PTSD, sleeping metaphorically with one eye open, and it's going to be a real mess. But you have to note that when they take the 5 omega monkeys from the original 5 groups in this thought experiment, and you put them together, one of those is going to rise to the top, and then their serotonin level will reflect their new position in life. And so, what you really have to kind of take away here is that your environment that you're in and your sense of autonomy or control within that environment is very important to your mental health. We can't, things get sorted out in various hierarchies. We, generally speaking, you just have to have a lot of times a hierarchical organization, which presumably it's best if it's respectful and fair, which oftentimes, of course, it isn't. But it's very hard to cooperate if you don't have some sort of hierarchical structure. You can look at the military, for example. I mean, the military, it's like, private, corporal, sergeant, different level sergeants, and lieutenants, and, captain, major, colonel, up to the generals. And the idea is that if you don't have that in a military situation where you may have to actually be in combat, really coordinated, you can't have people questioning things and, arguments breaking out about who's going to rule the roost. It's just not possible. So, and the idea is that the people who have finally ascend to let's say the rank of, colonel and general, these are individuals who are wise enough to know what to do and figure out strategies, et cetera, something that you don't expect out of the lower ranks, and likewise in a corporation or any, you're going to have the CEO, and ideally that person is somebody who really knows how to strategize, et cetera. But, in terms of mental health, you even if you're in a hierarchy, you'd like it to be fair and respectful. So in the interest, I'm going to stop here. Yes, Stacy. Yeah.
I apologize. I was just waving to our new attendee.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't have time really to go on to, discuss the management of anger and anxiety, which is so relevant to PTSD. But, I guess I would just, if anybody who has any questions or thoughts, let's do that rather than me just, absorbing the last, I guess we have about 10 or 15 minutes. So any questions, thoughts, concerns, et cetera? Yeah, Stacy.
So is it that PTSD is kind of like on the same order as hoarding or drug taking or something that happens when you don't have needs met?
When I'm sorry, when you don't have what?
Needs met?
Yeah. Well, again, it's all, yes. And this is, so if you remember, if you look at the biomedical theory of depression or anything else, it's just like, you're feeling emotional pain. You tell me you're depressed or you're too anxious or you've got PTSD or whatever, you have. And I'm going to say, okay, let me give you some medication that will partially anesthetize that emotional pain so you don't get in trouble. And you can maybe function better. But the problem is, because you're taking a drug to do it, whether it's alcohol, psychiatric drugs, whether it's opioid drugs, whatever you're using, the problem is at a certain point, you may develop a tolerance and it won't work as well. And you will become addicted, probably physically addicted to a lot of it, but definitely psychologically addicted at a certain point in time. And if your needs haven't been taken care of, you're always going to be having this chronic emotional pain. And it's tough. Yes. Also, Marcin?
I think
Marcin,
Dan
go
had
ahead.
his hand up for a while.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Marcin.
Oh, I just wanted to say really quickly that your talk really just reminds me of how our society's structured. And even with those even with that last section on the apes, with how, billionaires are on top of the hierarchy and everybody under them. And especially now when we find out that they pay 3% to 0% of taxes, to just kind of take advantage of the system. And, they feel entirely entitled to do so because they're at the top.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you're pointing, I agree 100% with you, Marcin. Those billionaires, as we call them now, used to be millionaires, but now billionaires. Yeah, they're the alphas, in this world as the way it's structured. And, and as you can see, they couldn't have it better in so many ways, because all that money gives them, dominance power. And after a while, it's just common sense. You don't, how much money does any one person need? They just want more and more, because they end up, and a lot of them, a lot of these people are really over on the psychopathic end of the spectrum, and their whole lives are about being the dominant one. And a lot of times with some of these characters, I don't know if it's true, but I've heard, for example, someone like Bill Gates maybe wasn't the alpha when he was, in grammar school and high school, etc. But he's definitely up there as an alpha today. And but it doesn't matter. And of course, when you give these people, especially the psychopathic individuals, this almost unlimited power and influence, by the politicians, do it, by the Justice Department, whatever, it's not good for the general population. I don't think. I mean, in a lot of ways you can break it down, but it's a terrible situation, and that's how they are.
I think even on the low spectrum, when it comes to like impoverished people, not like where like rich people will sue for anything, impoverished people will be taken advantage of and just kind of throw their hands up and say, this is how the world works. This is how I get,
Yeah, well, people who are on the lower rungs of the structure, the dominance hierarchy, and there's a lot of different ways you can conceptualize these hierarchies, but they're in a very difficult situation, because they oftentimes have no real opportunity to be able to move themselves up in the hierarchy. It's not necessarily, it could be, but it's not necessarily a fair process. And nobody should, again, this is basic. Nobody should have their basic needs for material stability, meaning, roof overhead, food on the table, whatever the necessities of life are in a given group. That should be taken care of one way or the other. And you have to have emotional support. You need to have community involvement, and you have to improve yourself as a person if you don't want chronic emotional pain. Now, all of that can be taken care of theoretically You don't have to have $1 billion or anything of that nature to have that happen. But what in reality is that where we have, you show me a poverty or a near poverty community, and I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to, what I'll see is, I'll see all sorts of need deficiencies that aren't being attended to. They don't even realize, and because again, they're just not educated in terms of their own needs. Yeah, Stacy.
Daniel, did you have a new question, or did you want the one that was written in the chat?
Yeah, a couple questions. Could I ask them both? I guess. I mean, the one in the chat was like, when we hear the word environment used by psychological professionals, I know they're talking about the generic environment that the person lives, and they assume it's a stable situation. But of course, there's the ecological environment, which is causing a lot of PTSD kinds of stress, like Greta Thunberg dropping out of school because she feels that her future is destroyed because of the extinction and the degradation of the environment. So that's just maybe a semantic point. I don't know if the psychological community is addressing that. But my real bigger question is, when you say hierarchy, I think we acknowledge that there are good hierarchies and bad hierarchies. I mean, hierarchies are not inherently bad, correct? I mean, there are meritocracy kinds of aspects where people can do good without falling victim to the corrupting aspects of hierarchy. So if you had to say hierarchies are X% good and X% negative, is that a fair thing that could be teased out percentage wise?
Well, I think, like you were saying, if there's a meritocracy involved that is fair and respectful, kind of to people, that's probably not a bad way to go, because you're going to have one. I mean, you can't find a group anywhere, anytime, that won't turn into some sort of hierarchical organization. Now, it can be very limited, like you could have a hunting and gathering group where you're going to have, there's going to be maybe a one leader, maybe a shaman or other, but basically in those kind of environments, they don't allow psychopathic bullying to go on. If that's how you are, generally, if that's how you are, they will remove you from the group. But you're always going to have it. And I think that if people feel that it's fair, they're not being duped. A lot of times what happens is somebody will present something as fair. Let me tell you what's fair, what's just here. And I can socialize you to believe that, and then you'll have it as a belief, but it might not really be fair. And I always believed, like you take, because it's such a prominent feature in what's going on in the country right now, at least one aspect of it, where you talk about the American history of racial oppression, slavery, and then Jim Crow, etc. The thing is, part of the way that was put in place was by a constant propaganda machine, which basically said, Black people, they're just not smart enough, or they have, emotional, control problems. It's their temperament, etc. And that's the reason why they just don't do well. And that kind of thing, and a lot of times, if you have that kind of propaganda going, what happens is the victims of it, the people who are being told, well, you really don't merit anything more, or like what they did in India, with the untouchables, the Dalits, or I can't remember the exact name, but where they basically said, well, your problem is, you're going to be kept on this low rung because of things you did in the past that were karmically not good. This is your punishment now in this new life for you. That's why it is. It's just, it's fair, accept it. And if you socialize people with those beliefs, then they'll sign on to it themselves. That's where you get, a real kind of a problem. And the people who are in the more dominant situation, they can get socialized that way too. Like, yeah, these people are inferior. Look at A, B, C, and D. Just open your eyes, you can see it. And that's why they're still not doing well, etc. And you can see that in all sorts of, arrangements. Probably what we have in the United States, I think, might be one, with the Constitution, at least as a theoretical document, might be, one of the fairest ways of kind of regulating a lot of things in terms of what kind of hierarchy you're going to end up having. Of course, we're in bad trouble today, because of the way things have gone. But, it's just one of those things where the socialization is really critical. And if people have beliefs that are no longer adaptive or useful, they need to be given the opportunity to unload them, to, let them go. But, what we have going on today, unfortunately, looks like a real ugly kind of, and again, it's the elites who are doing it. It's those alphas, elite people, where they're just basically doing, one of these divide and conquer things wherever they can, just dividing people up, not allowing people to really recognize how similar they are. We have the same drives, the same emotions, and we use language to think, we're so similar. There may be differences which are easily enough, understandable, like the racial differences. If you're somebody who evolved near the equator, you're likely to have a darker skin, or you wouldn't be alive, actually. You wouldn't even be there. But, everybody on a certain level is very, very more similar than they really are different. But unfortunately, the tribalistic hardwiring makes it real easy to divide people. And then these ones who are on the top, are pretty clever at keeping everybody divided. But yeah.
So I guess the biggest problem with hierarchies is that people tend to internalize them instead of objectively using them.
Yeah. Well, and when you say, and when we're saying internalize, that usually means part of that internalization is beliefs about how we are or they are and all of that. And once they become beliefs, it's really hard to unpack that, get rid of it. Takes a lot.
Hey, Dan, is there, can you go over like how a person would get rid of that? Because I've only heard about, cults and people getting into cults and how hard it is to pull them out of that mind frame. Like you have to like sit them down and have to like keep constantly asking them questions about like why they're doing the things they're doing and what they care about.
We have 30 seconds.
Okay, my final 30 seconds to answer that. What I used to do with clients is I would explain to them that if you want to get rid of a belief you have that probably is maladaptive or even delusional, what you need to do is force yourself to look at all the evidence that you can get that goes against your belief, and then be very conscious of the fact that when you see that evidence that goes against your belief, you're going to reflexively, almost instinctively, try to rationalize or minimize it away. And you got to catch yourself. And you just have to do that. And then there's a decent chance you'll deprogram yourself from those beliefs. But yeah, the way it used to be with the various cults that we had going on in the country, they still have. Once you have a set of beliefs, it's very hard to unpack them and load them. I have to stop. And again, Staci, thank you for giving me the opportunity, and guys for listening in. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Dan. And to our audience, please come back every week to learn how to connect more of the dots in this vicious cycle of corruption and how it relates to your mental health and quality of life.